the work of an Iowa-based organization, Bailing Out Benji, kind of helped spark this investigation. Can you tell me about that?
That resolution filed in King County Superior Court requires the company to pay the state $3.75 million with interest.
Bailing Out Benji regularly looks through these records of dogs' movement from state to state.
Bailing Out Benji
played a key part in unraveling a nationwide puppy scheme.
Bailing Out Benji,
an organization that's been working across the country to stop the pipeline of puppy mill breeders.
Bailing Out Benji.
I will use my voice because it will come out, and I will keep doing it until there are no more puppy mill dogs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bailing Out Benji's original podcast, Truth, Lies, and Puppy Mills. I am Kristen, and with me is Mindy. We missed Mindy last week. She was on the road. Turns out Mindy was in Indiana, which I really knew. But last week I definitely said Missouri because we were talking about Alexis being in Missouri, and I put Mindy there as well. So welcome back. So glad to have you back on the podcast with us.
Thank you so much. Can you tell me about Bailing Out Benji?
No, absolutely not. That's your job.
I spent technically one day in Indiana, but of course, because of the drive, I had to be there the night before and the day after. And every time I go and have conversations with breeders, it's always really interesting because they want to learn just as much as everyone else. And they're people that we've kind of left out of the conversation. But most interestingly, that little meeting, I had dinner with quite a few breeders in the Amish community. They're all leaders in their own way. But they were asking me about rehoming and rescue and licensing of shelters and rescues. And it kind of fit into what we were talking about 2 weeks ago. So.
Yeah. When we talked about kind of the spectrum of people working in animal welfare, and I know a lot of our comments that we got from volunteers and from other people listening to the podcast were interested in tell us more about the distinction between rescues and shelters and the different types of things. So it's interesting that at the same time, we're getting that feedback from folks listening to the podcast episode, and then you go out to the field and you're getting that same feedback from breeders. So that's a nice coincidence and tells us that there is an interest out there in hearing more about the subject.
The universe is telling us somehow we're
talk
where
about
we
it.
Should be,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I thought it would be great for us to discuss because there's no licensing that's uniform anywhere.
Yeah.
On the rescue shelter side or even the breeding side, it just runs the gambit, whether it's federal or different states doing things their own way. So
yeah, and this is a part of what we do that I can guarantee you I know very little about. So this is exciting for me because I am literally along for the ride today. So I often talk about that I'm learning, and this is totally fresh territory. So
I guess that's a good spot to say, we're also two individual people. So when we're talking, we're bringing our own experiences and our own opinions into things. We don't expect everyone to think like we do. You and I don't think the same on a lot of issues, and you shouldn't ever exist in an echo chamber, which is what I really like about Bailing Out Benji. But that's, when you meet our volunteers across the country, they also have their own way of educating as well. Yeah. So it's just, I don't know. I want people to know we're not a cult.
Right. And that was tricky for me when I first started. I was like, how are we controlling what all of our volunteers are saying at these booths? And you're like, we're not. They can say, we obviously have a framework. We have a structure of what we think and how we work and how we approach what we're trying to do. But our volunteers are all coming from different places. They've all got their own backgrounds, their own experience, and they're their own individual people as well. So definitely we want to be heading in the same direction, but we reserve the right to have our own thoughts.
Right. And make space for people who aren't where we are in our line of thinking. Because truly, we've said it several times on this podcast already, who I am today is not who I was a year ago or who I was 14 years ago when Bailing Out Benji was founded, right? We should constantly be evolving. We should want to change and want to grow. And so I think we should reserve the right for us to accept anyone on this path. I think a big phrase I like to try to keep in mind, it's not always easy, but the assume positive intent. If we're all having a conversation about the same thing, I like to lead by assuming we're all there with good intentions until you prove me wrong, right? We can all be proven wrong, and I'm always happy to admit when I'm wrong. but we grow as human beings and as organizations when we make the table a little bigger and have dissenting opinions and viewpoints.
Yeah. Very well said.
Yeah. So I guess we can start by talking about like rescue and shelter licensing requirements.
Okay.
Because that is a big talking point across the country. When advocates are working on like humane pet store ordinances or bills like that, and those ordinances are when the language says pet stores can't sell puppies from commercially bred facilities or commercial breeding facilities. This question comes up all the time because they say that rescue is unregulated and sheltering is unregulated. And so the breeding community, the pet stores, whomever on the other quote unquote side of where we are, they don't think it's fair that we are pushing for more licensing and requirements on their side and more oversight, where their perspective is that there's no at all oversight on rescues and shelters. And generally speaking, that's kind of true, but it really depends on every single state. So, Kristen, question: do shelters and rescues in Iowa need a license?
I feel like the answer is yes.
It is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was going to be a quiz, and then I have to like paying attention isn't my strong suit, and so then I'm like mining my memory of like, I know we've talked about this.
Well, that's kind of a big talking point for us because we're special in that respect. In Iowa, if you are a rescue, a shelter, a boarding facility, a vet clinic, a breeder, anyone handling a companion animal, you need to have a license and you're inspected annually. So we are very controlled in that respect. Similar states would be Missouri, Nebraska, Wisconsin. I'm trying to think of a few others. So those are really like our core. If we have a Department of Ag that's healthy and that is doing a lot of the inspection process, they also license and inspect rescues and shelters. Yeah. There are some states where there's absolutely no oversight at all, and those states are kind of scary. We often see, and I'll use Minnesota as an example, because we've actually received a little bit of pushback in Minnesota when we've suggested licensing and oversight for rescues and shelters.
So rescues and shelters in Minnesota, like I could just go open my doors and be like, I'm a rescue.
Yes, but most of them default to, well, I have a nonprofit status. Because I'm a 501c3, I'm doing right. So that's kind of how they set themselves apart.
Okay.
And Minnesota's just one example.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in that state, literally anybody can adopt out animals without any type of oversight. Okay. So what we kind of see in those situations, it's not a hard and fast rule, nothing ever is, but we do see in Minnesota pretty frequently rescues that have gotten in over their head and they become hoarding situations, and then the authorities have to go in and pull animals from that, and then we're rescuing from a rescue and it doesn't quite make sense. And so there are a lot of issues with not licensing and inspecting rescues and shelters, but I don't think like a federal license is the answer. Like I'm not suggesting we all get a USDA license because that's not the type of oversight we need. But we do need more oversight on the state level.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah, that's. I had no idea.
Well, it's
learning
hard because, like, I think it's accountability. I truly think, like, if you're handling animals,
to the requirement to be licensed is accountability. Okay.
Yeah, because then at least someone is checking in on you.
Right.
Right. Just defaulting to the IRS and saying I have a nonprofit status, to me, I mean, Kristen, you know. Nonprofits are messy anyway, but there's no real repercussions. So when we were investigating Jack's puppies for their sham hobo canine rescue, that was a dog broker that decided to get an Iowa rescue license. They got their nonprofit status, and then they were selling fake rescue dogs in states where it was illegal to do so. While doing all of that, they had a 501c3 status that was in good standing.
Right.
When we decided to try and get them shut down or held accountable or whatever our goal was there, we had to go to the Iowa Attorney General. We had to go down to the state charitable and say, hey, like, these are the red flags. This is what's happening. We built a case for them. And then they did their investigating and they were able to shut down the sham nonprofit. They were still in good standing with the IRS the entire time.
Right. Yeah. For a shelter or a rescue to rely on an IRS status, like that has nothing to do with what they're actually doing. And I think if you look at that licensure, I mean, it's not like a punitive requirement. I mean, it's to help. So like you said, these shelters getting in over their heads, having those inspections, like that's supposed to be helpful. We're not trying to catch you doing something wrong. We're trying to give you hints or pointers of, hey, this should be different, or this doesn't look good, or this is a red flag. So it makes more sense in that regard too.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so hard because like when we're reading inspection records for breeders, we often see the inspector write a note that's like, this person should downsize. We need these dogs, or this breeder to limit how many dogs they have or add a staff. Mm-hmm. So they're not necessarily writing violations all the time in those cases. It is that helpful hint of, you just need a little assistance. You need someone in here. So I don't think it's a bad thing to have oversight. If you're dealing with a companion animal, it's nice to have just a set of eyes making sure things are happening.
Now I'm curious, do you have any sense of how many states don't require licensing for shelters and rescues?
It's around 25.
Okay.
And I say that because
half.
But no one tracks this stuff, right? Like we track it. We're trying to pay attention to different state laws and requirements, but that's not something that's just like out there for people, the general public, to reference. And so even when they're adopting a dog, it's important for them to make sure they're adopting from a reputable, humane place as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it gets even messier when you look at breeding laws across the country.
Yeah. Okay. Are we ready to switch gears and talk about breeding licensing?
Unless you have questions about...
Not at the moment. I'm sure I will.
Fair. We're going to start at the federal level because people get very confused on social media. I'm going to talk about my mom for a quick sec because she is someone who gets confused between federal and state. And so even when I'm talking about her local legislators, she constantly refers to the federal level. And I think that's something that happens pretty regularly in our world. People are kind of confused about who their lawmaker even is on the state or federal level. Mm-hmm. This is the same way when it comes to breeding because the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, is tasked with licensing and inspecting breeding facilities across the country that have more than 5 breeding females and sell sight unseen. So that means broker, pet store, someone delivers the puppy for you. So that is the caveat for licensure.
At the national level?
On the federal level.
Okay, so any breeder in the country, no matter what state you're in, if you've got 5 or more
breeding females,
you've got to be licensed by the USDA.
If you sell through a third party.
Okay.
Yes.
Sell through a third party. Okay.
I'm going to make this a little messy.
Internet counts as a third party or not? If I am a breeder and I just set up my own website and sell, does that count as a third party?
It depends on how you ship the puppies. So if you meet Justine in person and deliver that puppy, you don't need a USDA license.
Hey, producer Justine.
If you fly, if you put that puppy on a cargo plane and they, get picked up elsewhere, if you put them in a transport van and they get picked up elsewhere, or again, if they get sold through a pet store, through a broker.
So as soon as anybody else comes into the picture, now I need a license.
Yes. If there is someone in between the breeder and the buyer, you usually need a USDA license. A few years ago, the USDA did try to kind of license some rescues. It was weird. It happened because of a dog auction article that I'm sure we'll talk about sooner or later. But that was really hard too because rescues typically do in-person adoptions. They're not shipping puppies across the country. So there was a lot of weird caveats with what they were attempting to do with that. But there are a handful of rescues, like National Mill Dog Rescue in Colorado. They have a license with the USDA. So that doesn't mean they're not to be trusted, right? They're just a shelter/rescue that operates on such a level. They did get a USDA license. So that is one type of USDA license, and that would be called a Class A license. So if you're a breeder who meets all of those stipulations, you need a Class A license. The Class B license is a dealer license, and that is what we refer to as brokers. Okay. So we use the term broker pretty freely, pretty often. To obtain, the reason you might need a broker license is when you buy and resell puppies from someone else. So I could be a breeder. I could have my own dogs, 25, 30 dogs, whatever. And then I'm buying a litter of puppies from you, Kristen, and then I'm selling them myself. So I'm either selling them as Mindy, I'm selling them through a broker, through a store, whatever. But the minute I buy and resell somebody's puppies, I am a broker. So there are two types of brokers, people who breed.
I feel like I should be taking notes.
Oh, it's so
That's good.
much. And so trying to make it as simple as possible is important, because even one of our own volunteers, they were like, the other day, I didn't realize that a specific broker she was looking into buys from other brokers. That's weird. I was like, well, the broker you're thinking about exists just to broker. So we jokingly, not even jokingly, we very seriously have called brokers windowless warehouses full of puppies, because a broker exists to house animals, hundreds sometimes at a time, and those are typically puppies going to their destination of the pet store or wherever that final destination is. And so even within our own community, people are confused between the difference of a breeder broker or a broker who handles the housing of the puppies, the vetting of the puppies, and the transporting of the puppies. So even on the federal level, there are two very different types of dealers.
Okay. So Class B is the brokers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm a breeder broker,
You have to have a Class B.
so I'm an A and a B?
You're just a B.
I'm just a B.
Yep. But that's why it's confusing, because then all of a sudden you're labeled as a broker,
Right.
when really you're just a breeder who happens to buy and resell other people's puppies. And that could be one puppy, or it could be 500 puppies. So if the USDA catches a breeder buying and reselling, then they get I don't know if it's technically a complaint, but it does warrant the inspector to go out there, excuse me, and then it requires them to change over their licensing. So they would have to cancel the Class A and move over to Class B.
And because there's different types of licenses, then there's also, does that mean different inspection requirements and whatnot?
No, thankfully with the USDA, it's all pretty similar.
Okay.
So
it's really just kind of paperwork, which license you have.
Right.
Okay.
And part of this is our fault. Alexis and I are really good at catching quote unquote illegal brokers. We are good at catching a lot of things, but we often see breeders who are buying and reselling puppies. And then that's a quick email to the USDA. And we just say, we believe they need this license based on these records we receive.
And then do they get a penalty, or do they just need to then just get that license?
Usually they just need to go and get the new license.
Okay.
So
just, again, a paperwork thing.
right.
Okay.
And like I said, I jokingly refer to brokers as, unjokingly, a warehouse full of puppies, because that's at the root of it what they appear to be. That's
Or
what we
could definitely potentially be.
Definitely, potentially be. Exactly. And so Alexis and I have been to 3 brokering facilities now in our little field research tours. All 3 of them operated extremely differently. Not all of them had windows, most of them. I should say 2 out of the 3. Again, it's not that hard and fast rule, right? It's just something we've always said. It's a windowless warehouse. We're trying to bring some of that back, I guess, a little bit. But it's just interesting that as much as we thought we knew about the industry, even 3 people who just happen to have the same license have 3 completely different ways of operating, 3 different ways of housing puppies, transporting them, all of it. So that was kind of eye-opening for us to learn about.
It reinforces it's never all and it's never none, right? You can't make an assumption about every single person. But again, when we haven't been able to see that, or when we haven't been able to have conversations with those people, with different, with people in the breeding world, in the brokering world, in the rescue world, in the shelter world, if you can't access that, then how do you know? How are you supposed to know? So having those open doors is
Right.
such a cool thing.
Well, and it goes back to I think the first episode I mentioned how many people in the pet industry world were like, we listened to your first podcast. You were so close. For being an outsider, you put so many things together and you weren't always right there and you weren't always correct. But it's fun for us to see how maybe we were wrong. I mean, it sounds weird. I love being proven wrong. I love learning. And so going into these facilities and having my mind blown and my challenge or my beliefs challenged I think it's fun and it makes life interesting and it makes us better advocates, I think, because we can talk about it.
We talked about it a little bit earlier, just in the office, just shooting the breeze about how we don't really have goals. We literally just follow the data, and it's so fun just to like, we don't know where it's going to take us next, and we're just going to follow it and see what comes up, and then we'll go there. And it's exciting. I think it makes us so that we're not tied to a specific goal, or we're not tied to a specific project. That once we realize, then, oh no, we were on the wrong path. Now we can't pivot because we've made this our whole identity. Like, our identity is, let's see what's around this corner. Let's open that door and see what's behind it.
Well, we believe that education is going to be what ends puppy mills, and that means we have to keep learning too, right? Yes. And we have to believe that the breeders want to learn too.
And it's education everywhere. Because initially I was like, we need to educate these consumers. The consumers need to understand that's going to what's bringing the change. But now we've got these breeders that are like, hey, we want to know more. We want to do better.
Just for the first time, and again, we're not advocating that people rush out and buy dogs or anything like that. We're just sharing with you guys what we're working on now and the conversations we're having. But for the first time ever, a lot of these breeders get to ask us about what sheltering is, what rescue is, what are the frustrations that this world has against the breeding world. I don't know if any of those conversations are ever going to fix the world, but we're having conversations, right? And we're trying to find a way that we can problem solve together. And I think that our industry has done a phenomenal job of pushing for change. We've educated, we've screamed, we've protested, we've passed laws. Like, we have done so much in so long. We've been working on this issue for a long time, not just bailing out Benji, a lot of people. And so now it's to a point where I really think, how can we see what the data is telling us now? Not what we felt 40 years ago, or what the data was telling us 40 years ago. Yeah. What is happening right now, and what problems still need fixed right now? And I think that's where we're getting some pushback. It's not necessarily that we're touring kennels, because people go tour kennels all the time. I think it's the fear of pivoting and trying to problem solve in new ways, because we sit in an echo chamber. Our industry very much sits in an echo chamber, and I think we're having fun trying to step outside of it. It's stressful, but yeah, So
back to licensing.
That's federal.
Yes,
for the most part. It was a very brief overview. Now, when we look at the state level, there are 20 states, I have it written down, 20 states that have zero breeder oversight. So nobody is registered, nobody is inspected, unless those breeders in that state require a USDA license. They're just completely running off the radar, operating off the radar.
Okay.
And so that is where we hear the term, you often hear puppy mill, right? Because they're unlicensed and unregulated. You hear backyard breeder. But unfortunately, those breeders don't really have an option for licensing unless they choose to be USDA, and they might not even meet those requirements, right? So it's a really interesting way of looking at the problem, because some of the quote unquote worst states for violations don't have state oversight. And so if we're looking at a state like Arkansas, they have not even very many USDA licensees anymore. They used to be a bigger state for USDA licensees. A lot of people have retired out, but even more people have just canceled their license and operate off the radar completely, because that's legal so long as they're not selling through a third party.
Wow. Or so long as they don't get caught selling through a third party.
Right. But that's it's so hard as we're talking about this. We don't want to come off as judgmental. That's not our goal here. But we are trying to just share the reality of what's happening.
Right. We want to be realistic.
Right. Yeah. And there are some people who don't think more regulation helps anything, especially, when you're looking at breeders. It's if you regulate them, are they actually going to follow the laws? I don't know if anyone follows the laws if they don't want to, right? But
that doesn't mean you don't have the laws.
Right. You have a framework for safety, guardrails. You need something, right? So I still think that there's a good opportunity for breeders, for rescues, for all of these organizations to focus on those two things. What states don't require rescue shelter license and what states don't require breeder license, and how can we solve that problem there? Because then I do think we'd see less problems overall with rescues having to send animals north, the pet overpopulation and things like that. So I think that, oversight is a little helpful.
And so that's up to those state legislatures then to make that a requirement in their state.
Yeah, you'd have to pass a law. So like in Iowa, we're overseen by the Iowa Department of Ag. That's the same agriculture, I should say. The same thing as Missouri Department of Agriculture. Then you have states like Minnesota and Indiana. Those states they require licensing and regulation, we'll say. It's not regular inspections, but also all of their stuff is private. So as a consumer, you couldn't email it's called the Minnesota Board of Animal Health. So both Indiana and Minnesota have taken the licensing away from the Department of Ag.
Okay.
And they started their own Minnesota Board of Animal Health or Indiana Board of Animal Health. Well, they have completely protected all of the information. So as a consumer, you can't email and say, does this breeder have a clean inspection history? Because that is private information. Indiana, we can technically request records, and we can get records on facilities that have violations, but we can't get the CVIs that we use to track puppy sales across the country. And in their case, their breeders are registered. They get one inspection one time and then never get another inspection again on the state level unless they get a complaint. And then the consumer has to even know where to file the complaint. So it's kind of messy.
Wow. So it's hard for consumers to get at that information. Can organizations like Bailing Out Benji get at that information? I know you said Indiana, we can request the records.
It depends on the record. So in Indiana, we can request inspection records, but even then it's very limited information. But we cannot request the CVI data that we use to track the puppy sales. In Minnesota, we can't get either.
And tell me again, what are CVIs?
Those are the certificates of veterinary inspection. So it's required anytime an animal crosses state lines.
Okay. So how do we get information about breeders in Indiana?
We have to do FOIA requests in every state. So when we're building our database, that's something else that kind of sets us apart. A lot of the organizations focus on just the federal. So they might do inspection polls for breeders on the state level with violations, but they're not looking at the big picture. How many state licensees are out there, anything like that. So in Indiana, we would go to the Indiana Board of Animal Health and send a Freedom of Information Act request in and ask them for the information. Okay. And then we're at their mercy. So whatever they give us is what we have. And that's the same in every state. We have to go to the Department of Ag or to that agency, the licensing agency, and request the documents.
So if a state like that doesn't have the licensure requirements, doesn't have that oversight, then when we're saying, and you may have just set me up to ask this question, when we're saying this state has the most violations, how is that accurate when there's states who 0 violations, but also 0 inspections? So that doesn't necessarily, saying that this state has this many violations does not necessarily make them worse than this other state because no one's inspecting.
Right. And it's so much worse than that almost. Like today when I was getting ready for this, I was writing down we had spoken about it, I was writing down the minimum requirement for licensing. Okay. So I had mentioned earlier, the USDA level, it's 5 breeding females. In Iowa, the state I am familiar with the most, 4 breeding females. So it's 4, if I had 4 females in my home, I would need a license to breed them, right? Just on the state level in Iowa.
From Iowa, okay.
In Missouri, that cap is 3 dogs. So when we're looking at the number of quote unquote puppy mills, right, or the number of licensed breeders in a state, which I don't believe every breeder who breeds is a puppy mill, I just want to say that. But when we're looking at Missouri and we're constantly saying, well, they're the worst, they have the most, it's because their threshold for licensing is 3 females. Mm-hmm. In Indiana, I told you this earlier, we'll see if you remember, what's the threshold for licensing in Indiana?
20.
It is 20.
Hey!
Yeah.
Yes!
So 20 females in Indiana.
So that means you're going to have more licensed breeders in Missouri because the threshold's lower. More licensed breeders means more inspections, which means more violations, versus Indiana, where there's going to be a lot more breeders who don't have to be licensed. No one's looking at them. Who knows how many violations there would be if people were looking? Yes. So we're not comparing apples and oranges.
We're not. And so when we were trying to, Alexis and I did the 2024 USDA audit earlier this year. Alexis worked really hard on it. But we noticed that other organizations who are releasing similar reports had different ways of reporting the data. And so much of it is, what is that worst state? Yeah. And I just don't feel like we can accurately compare that when Arkansas doesn't have any state licensing. Indiana barely has state licensing. Missouri has strict state licensing. And so it's like, how do you rectify all of that and call someone, a puppy mill or not, or say the state is a puppy mill state or isn't?
And this probably is a rhetorical question that we don't need to answer, but like, why do we need a worse state? Why do we need that state to hold up and be like, they're the worst, when we're focusing on the problem, right? It doesn't matter what side of what border the problem's on. It's a problem we have in the country. Why the obsession with this is the worst state? What's the driving factor for that?
I think we all just need an enemy. I truly think that if we have a target, a focus. Then it's a focus. And Missouri, they still have some very problematic facilities. Like, do not misrepresent what I'm trying to say. We read those violations. But when you look at Missouri's violations and the percentage of the breeders with them, Alexis talked about it last week, compared to Wisconsin, Wisconsin is truly failing. Like, they have breeders that are struggling. I don't know if those breeders are ever going to get better. I wish they would. But there are some people who I think are going to have to close down, retire out and close down, because they're not changing their mindset. But how do you say Wisconsin's the worst puppy mill state when they have nowhere near the number of licensed dog breeders as other states? And I feel like that's part of the conversation we have to fix, because when we did our puppy mill maps, those went viral in 2020. And the history of those, you've seen them, the map with all the dots everywhere. Those were created out of necessity. So during the first Trump administration, he had taken down all of the USDA records offline. We couldn't search for them. Once he did put them back, or the department put them back, they were all redacted. So because of Bailing Out Benji's database and the history of things we keep, we were still pretty confidently able to say who was doing what. So we decided to use our platform to put these maps out. And our Missouri map was shared, viewed millions of times on Facebook. But it was a map of Missouri, and it was every USDA licensed breeder, and it was color-coded based on the number of adult breeding dogs they have. I called that a puppy mill map, because in my head, that's what I just created. Now, knowing more, I've matured. I've done a lot more research than I did, back in the day, or than I had access to back in the day. Now I realized I just made a map of all the licensed breeders and accused them of being puppy mills without any proof, right? Did all of them have violations? No, right? So now we've even tried to flip how we're communicating about breeders. Are they licensed? That's a green flag. Like, I don't want people buying from unlicensed facilities, right? Unless they're a small preservation breeder or hobby breeder. But that's so messy when we're giving advice now, because we have an even deeper understanding of the industry.
And maybe that's part of the incentive too, to have that enemy because it's not black and white. It's not simple. And we crave simple, right? Like, we want the simple message, the slogan, the enemy, whatever, because it is a lot more complicated than that. But that's a harder story to tell.
And it's a harder story to fundraise off of.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
I definitely know what you mean.
It is so hard though, because it's like, well, what does Bailing Out Benji do then? And it's like, but we're doing all of the work. No one else is. Our database is the largest database, because we're not only tracking everyone who has a license, it's the people who have canceled licenses, it's the transport companies. We're tracking the inspectors to see on the state and federal level who is actually reporting violations. If we're seeing violations on the state level in Kansas that aren't being documented on the federal level, Does that mean the federal inspector is choosing not to write things down? Or does that mean Kansas has stronger state laws? Like, there are a lot of caveats and nuances to this issue that we've never even considered exploring before until now. And that's why it's exciting.
This might be too big of a question for this episode. Maybe this is one of those another episode bookmarks.
Yeah.
What are we doing with all that data?
This is going to be another episode because we are actually, for any longtime followers, you know that we used to have an online search engine that the public could kind of like plug things in, and we're working on bringing that back. I'm really excited. It's going to cut down immensely on the amount of emails that Alexis and I receive, whether it's volunteers asking about a specific breeder or members of the public asking. It'll be easier to send them a link and say, start here, and then we can talk.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, when we were talking about, state legislature then needing to change, I'm presuming that data goes to inform some of those decisions as well, or to help move that process along as well, all that research that we have gathered. Because we're looking into these areas that no one else is looking at, we're able to say, look, did you know this?
Right. And right now with our puppies, our online puppy mill project that we're working on, we're finding so many illegal breeders across the country. And I don't just mean like people having a litter of puppies and selling them online. I mean people who clearly need a USDA or a state license in their community and they're operating without one. So our job is to file those complaints and bring them into licensing. But then there are still all of those people who exist in the world outside of licensing and regulation. And our research there will help us decide, is there a problem in California? Is there a problem in Florida, like for unlicensed breeders? And then how can you try to address it? But you need to do it with data. And right now, when it comes to policy, everyone is just rushing to defend their business or to shut down somebody else's business, and no one is doing it with the forethought of what does the future look like, or the present, what is the data telling us? And that's the hole we're trying to fill. We're in our data collection era. We're really just grabbing as much as we can, and we're making it make sense in our database so we can somehow communicate that to the world.
Mm-hmm. And that online project is really opening those curtains to, as much as we shut down pet stores and we can celebrate that, New York's no longer selling animals in stores. And now we can see where that's gone. So the things that the industry has been doing over the years to shut down puppy mills isn't necessarily shutting down puppy mills. It's just diverting the business elsewhere.
Right. And some puppy mills get shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And those typically happen when charges are pressed and the attorney general goes in or the sheriff goes in. I do think that when puppy mills specifically have fewer outlets in which to sell, they might close. But also, like I mentioned earlier, there are people who are just like, I'm done with the government. I'm going to cancel my license and I'm going to keep operating on my own until someone tells me I can't. And to be honest, the USDA doesn't have the capability to follow up on all of that.
Right.
So in our database, if you're a breeder, Kristen, you've got a profile in our database, I will manually switch you to canceled. And then when I see you selling puppies in 5 months, I am making notes of what breeds did you sell, what dates were you selling, how did you sell, and then I have to file another complaint with the USDA and say, hey, this person is still participating in AWA regulated activity, and I believe they need a license. So we have to do all of that catch-up work for the USDA because they don't have the capability.
So you're talking about, so we've got people who maybe have just discontinued their license. They've just voluntarily said, nope, I don't want to be licensed anymore, which feels weird to me that like I'm this breeder and I've got 50 dogs and I've been inspected by the USDA. And now all of a sudden I'm like, never mind, I'm done. And the USDA is like, okay. But I'm sure they're shorthanded keeping up with the breeders they have. So obviously they're not checking up on ones who have now become unlicensed. It just feels weird to me that I can just be like, never mind, I don't want to be licensed anymore. I'm going to stop breeding. And then you also have people who never got the license to begin with, should have, but didn't. The USDA is never going to know unless somebody in their community files a complaint. So as we're watching all of this activity and we can see these dogs moving all over the country, we can get back to them and say, oh, hey, this person's breeding without a license, and call that out. But otherwise, it would just be a community complaint that would draw the attention.
And that's something Alexis deals with on a daily basis. People will buy a puppy, or they're looking into a puppy, and then they email her and say, is this a safe place to buy from? And we also learn about unlicensed breeders that way. Yeah. But really, again, no one is tracking all of that except for us. Right. And thankfully, the way our database works, like, we can really communicate all of that with each other. We can keep track of how many complaints we filed, how many breeders got licensed after the complaints we filed. Like, all of that is stuff we can technically track, but we have no need to self-report that necessarily. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess it's something we can maybe brag about to get donations or something. I'm not sure, but
if there's any other data nerds out there that are impressed by that.
I know. That's it. We need the data nerds to be like, thank you, you're solving a problem nobody knew was a thing.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what we're doing. We're just trying to, at the root of it, figure out how vast the problem is for now.
Yeah. And I feel like until we have a good understanding of that, and not just we as Bailing Out Benji, but we as the entire industry that's working to fix this, whether it is breeders and brokers and consumers and rescues and shelters, everyone involved, until we get an idea of the scope of the problem and these little loopholes that exist that kind of distort the scope of the problem, it's really hard to do much of anything into prevention. I mean, yeah, it just kind of feels like you're
well, it's like, what's the goal, right? The end of the day, what's the goal? And our goal is to eliminate puppy mills and to eliminate cruel and inhumane breeding practices. So when I adopted Ox, he's a dog that, you know this, Kristen, but for our listeners, I adopted him from a breeder who has a retirement program. So they retire their dogs by the male dogs by 7. So Ox was just waiting for someone, right? It was at a kennel I was visiting. We locked eyes. I loved him. He loved me. Now my whole life is like slobber and English Mastiff hair everywhere. But I got an email from a rescue that week, and I'm not even friends with the rescue on Facebook, which means I know when I privately announced this on my own page, like, word spread and Mindy's now a traitor and all this stuff. But I got an email from a rescue, and they were like, are you trying to shut down puppy mills, or are you enabling them to continue? And that kind of stopped me in my tracks, because I was like, we are trying to shut down puppy mills, but not every breeder is a puppy mill. That's something we've always said. That's something we've always believed. And so to have a rescue who also gets dogs from breeders, like, they get breeder surrenders, they get things, to have them question whether or not it was humane or ethical for me to adopt straight from a breeder instead of asking a rescue to take the dog first and then adopting from them, it made no sense. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like so much of what we're doing is emotionally charged, that people can't always see beyond their toes to see what the big picture is. Or again, working upstream to see what everyone is working on. And if we are trying to educate or have conversations with breeders about how to do things in a way that the public would be okay with, that's helping dogs right now. Mm-hmm. We are ending puppy mill cruelty by making sure the dogs that currently exist in the system are not suffering. And I think that's hard for some people to grasp, because we know that there's so much suffering.
Yeah, and Ox was, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't he waiting for a long time? Like, they couldn't find a rescue to take him because he is part Ox. And so to me then, once you hear the story of Ox and his situation individually, it changes where you're like, oh, I see. So you couldn't have gone to a rescue to get Ox. There weren't rescues to take Ox. The family had been trying. And you took Ox. So once you get the story, then you're like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. And then your example is someone who, again, you shared it on your personal page. Somehow it got to someone who's not connected to you on your personal page. That person made up a story about what just happened and then came at you with their story, which isn't Ox's story.
Well, and that's the assumptions, right? We talked about that a few episodes ago. We assume a lot in this world. And if I would have gone down there and if I would have gotten Ox and come back and said, I rescued him from a puppy mill in Missouri, I would have gotten so much praise, right? People would have been like, thank you, Mindy, you saved his life. Thank you. But the truth is, Ox didn't need rescued. His people did love him. His people trained him. They made sure that he was a well-adjusted adult dog. So when it was time to be rehomed, he was ready. I keep in touch with the breeder. She asks me questions. I ask her questions. Like, she's not my enemy. And the fact that I didn't make her my enemy on social media is what made rescues mad. Or whoever mad, right? Not just rescues, but it made people mad because I further muddied the waters. I made things even more unclear by saying, look, I adopted a dog from a breeder, but he's a retired breeding dog, right? It's the same thing that would have happened if I went to my rescue friends and adopted from them. I also didn't pay an adoption fee. So people were so mad that I quote unquote bought this dog. No money was exchanged. I had to sign a contract saying at any point in time, I'd give the dog back if I couldn't take care of him anymore. That's the sign of a responsible breeder, right? That's the sign of a rescue or a shelter that's responsible, and they want that dog back no matter what. So I just feel like there's a lot of gray area. And the more conversations we have with these people, the more we'll realize we have more in common than we do separate. So how can we grow that? And how can we problem solve together to stop the cruel and inhumane things we're seeing? Because from what I'm learning, no one on either side wants to see dogs being tortured, dogs being killed in puppy mills, dogs being shot, whatever, all of the pictures we have. There are breeders who don't want to see that either. So
yeah, and I don't tell that story of the person who came at you to vilify that person. We all do it. It's human nature. But just to say, this is again that importance of open communication, the importance of having those conversations instead of making the assumptions and coming after people. To maybe a better approach would be to, Mindy, tell me about how you got Ox. And then get the information before you make your judgment. I
mean, asking me if I'm enabling puppy mills is just as laughable. I had someone accuse me of getting paid by Petland. I had a table full of Amish breeders last week laughing when I told them that someone thought Petland signs my paychecks because they were like, oh, Petland would never pay you. And I'm like, right, you get it.
Y'all also like those little comics that are like, if I won the lottery, I wouldn't tell anybody, but there would be signs. Like, y'all, if we had Petland money, things would be different. I'm just saying. We don't have Petland money.
Right. And it's just like, even that comment, it was left out of like, they were angry. They're not happy with what we're doing. And those feelings are valid, but also let's not make stories up. Let's not lie, right? I mean, that's silly. It's at the root of it. And ask us questions. Yeah. We're probably the most transparent group you will find. And even when they're uncomfortable questions, we answer them because we're nothing if not honest. And
we love to talk.
We love to talk. Welcome to the podcast. Yeah. So I guess this kind of took a turn. Lots of.
Are we still talking about licensing?
Kind of. Yeah. For the record, Bailing Out Benji is not a licensed rescue or shelter in the state of Iowa because we are not an adoption agency. So we are a 501c3 with the federal government.
And a lot of people in our office building think we are a rescue and are consistently asking me if my dog is for adoption.
Yeah, that's my bad.
That's a no. She is not. She is my dog.
When I've walked fosters around the building, everyone like flocks and they're excited to pet them and learn their story. So now Leia has a home.
Yes. Cannot have her.
Well, I think we're no longer going to say next week we're talking about this because we have ADHD.
We cannot be relied upon to stick to the schedule.
We follow the data, right? Yeah. So we follow the flow of the conversation. But the goal is to have Alexis on the next 2 or 3 episodes. We're not quite sure. And we're just going to talk about what our research looks like. we're going to go into the different states, what records we pull from the states, how we build our database, and then more on what the plans are for that database. How can we turn it into a public tool for good without causing harm to anyone who may be a licensed breeder in the country? So
I love it. I look forward to it.
I am excited. I hope people want to fund it. I hope people are excited by the content and they can appreciate how much work went into it, because it's not, I mean, you've seen it. We're hoping to release our search engine in the next few weeks, but it's so much. It's a labor of love. It's growing every single day. It's evolving every day. And so to share it with everybody is exciting. I just want it to be appreciated. And
Yep. That sounds like a good segue into our fundraising pitch.
yeah.
So as always, if you're enjoying the podcast, if you're enjoying the research that we put out and the work that we do, if you're on board with our mission to end puppy mills, we would love for you to make a donation. There's a link in the podcast notes. There's a link on our website. You can go to bailingoutbenji.com and find our donate button. It's everywhere. And yeah, make a donation, support the work that we're doing. If you sign up to be a monthly recurring donor, we'll send you a free shirt. I still have shirts left. Until I run out of shirts, I'm sending free shirts for recurring donors. So it makes a big difference to the work that we do to have that steady money coming in. And it is not cheap, what we do. So.
Well, and I don't even know if we've said this publicly, but like, I joke, I'm not going to say the politician's name, but I joke that we're a specific politician that runs on $5 and $10 donations, because that's truly who we are. That's true. If you look at our donation history, it is a bunch of people like you who are listening, who loved what we said, loved what we put out there, and donated $5 or $10. Yes. We are not well funded, which is why we ask about donations like every episode and on our social media, because the work we're doing, it's not glamorous. We don't get to put the donate button on a dog we saved and say, please help us. So anything you can give is really helpful.
If we get a $100 donation, we're like, oh my gosh.
We're talking about
someone gave us $100.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a lot of small donors, which is fantastic. It's people that believe in what we do and they're doing what they can to support it. And that's amazing.
And unfortunately, like the communities we quote unquote serve, which everyone asks on every grant application ever, which is why we don't fit in a box and don't get many grants. But it asks about the community we serve. A lot of the people we're helping have bought a sick or a dying dog, right? They have bought a dog on a credit card. These are people who don't have money, so they can't necessarily give back to us at this moment in time. So it's not like we can even like lean on the people we've actually helped and said, can you give us money? Because no, their dog died and they still have a $10,000 bill for paying it off.
I look forward to when we can get some of these tools into the hands of the public, so that the people we're helping are the people who are in the process of buying the dog, right? So they're looking for a dog, they're looking to buy or adopt. We can help them before they get the sick dog. And that to me is, I feel like as people get these tools and are able to do that research, then that's where it's like, you know what, that was worth it. Thank you so much for helping me to, it's not easy. It's a confusing world trying to navigate some of these, the licenses and the violations and the breeders, and it's overwhelming. So I would much rather we be hearing way more stories of people that used our resources before they acquired their dog than the ones who are coming to us with the sick dog, asking for help, because by then it's too late.
And again, we're not asking people to run out and buy dogs.
Right.
It's the people who that's what they're going to do anyway, right? So we're trying to reach them before they support a puppy mill, because that'll make the puppy mills close faster. If we can take the money out of that equation, then at least we've helped make the world a little bit better for dogs and for people. So anywho, thank you all for sitting with us another week. This is really exciting. I'm glad you made me do this, Kristen. I'm glad. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for another week and for being a part of the conversation. Please reach out to us. We love feedback. any content ideas or just, questions if you want us to go into something a little more. We do have plans for a lot of episodes coming up, but we are an open book. So feel free to ask, and we'll sit with you again next week. Thanks, everyone.